Gia Ditch, and welcome to Crack on the Coast, your favorite blend of Irish heritage, history, and the stories that connect us across oceans and generations. I'm Michael Schilling.
And I'm Shaun Morgan, and today we have something a wee bit different and exciting, an intersection of sport, culture, diplomacy, and, as always, Irish pride.
That's right, Shaun. And usually when we talk about an Irish sport with a funny-looking stick, you wouldn't think of what we're going to talk about today. You would be thinking about camogie or hurling or something like that. But today we actually have Michael Kennedy, who's the CEO of Ireland Lacrosse, someone we had the honor of meeting at the Great Hunger Institute Summer School Conference over in Strokestown this past May. And we welcome Mike to the show. Thanks for being on, Mike.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I guess first thing we should talk about, Shaun, right, is how you usually don't hear about Irish and lacrosse. That's a different one.
And obviously, for our listeners who are from the US, they'll understand lacrosse. But for those who are maybe outside, and I'm being hopeful in that regards, they don't know what lacrosse is. And then for both groups, it's how Ireland and lacrosse intersect together. So, Mike, can you take us a look back at the roots of the game itself of lacrosse?
Sure, yeah. And I'll actually just start with an anecdote that actually links the distant past with the future, and that'll help set some of the context of it. So, in terms of the future, the number one news story in international lacrosse at the moment is that lacrosse has been admitted to the Olympic Games, the Summer Olympics for LA in 2028. So, that is a major issue. And it's very exciting. Everybody involved in the sport is going to get so much more coverage and so many eyes on the game, etc. But lacrosse was previously in the Olympics, going all the way back to 1904 and 1908. And the 1908 Olympics was held in London in the UK, and the Canada team won the gold medal. And the captain of that team was named Paddy Brennan, and he was born in Ireland, but he emigrated to Canada. So no matter what happens in LA in 2028, we can always say there's an Irishman with a gold medal in lacrosse from the Olympic Games. So, so I think that probably will bookend everything else that we might talk about in between. So just to respond more directly to your question. So the origins of the game of lacrosse are with the indigenous people of North America. So they say that they received the game from the creator. They play the game. They call it a medicine game. They play it to celebrate the creator, to honor the creator. And historically, they used to play tribe against tribe. There would be hundreds of players. The game could go on for 2 or 3 days, etc. So it has this real kind of spiritual significance for indigenous people, and different tribes play different versions of the game. So there's some like Ojibwe and the Choctaw, they actually play with 2 sticks. So they have 2 sticks and 1 ball. But the version that is more common today is based on a version that's played by the Haudenosaunee. So the Haudenosaunee is their native language. They used to be known as the Iroquois, and they're a federation of 6 tribes, mostly around kind of upstate New York and southern Ontario and Canada. So really, it's their version of the original game that was converted into modern day version of lacrosse. And very uniquely, they play as a national team in world championship events. They play as the Haudenosaunee. And for people not that familiar, I usually, I'm a big soccer person, so I tell people it's like the Haudenosaunee are to lacrosse what Brazil are to soccer. They don't always win, but they're known for playing the most creative version, expressive version. And really, one of the top players in the world at the moment is a Haudenosaunee player named Lyle Thompson, who went to the University of Albany. So,
oh wow!
So yeah, that's where the game itself originates.
Now, how did how did it originate as a sport in Ireland? Like, when did it come over? And up to obviously you're there. There's Ireland Lacrosse and everything else, but when was it introduced into the island itself?
Yeah, so on our website, I've actually written a booklet on the history of Irish lacrosse because I uncovered some really amazing history. So it turns out that the first lacrosse team in Ireland was established in 1872 in Newtownards, which is right outside Belfast. And so they had this team in Newtownards, and it's difficult for me. I haven't been able to identify how it got there, but what I do know is shortly after 1872, there were a number of trips taken by teams from around the Montreal area. Even some Native American teams, like Caughnawaga teams, traveled to the UK and Ireland, and they played exhibition games in Northern Ireland, in England, in Scotland, etc. So the establishment of the Newtownards team preceded any of those trips, but they happened very shortly thereafter. And there was from what I can tell from my research, there was a thriving league in the late 1800s. But it seems to have died out around 1902, 1903. And I suspect, I haven't got a whole lot of hard evidence around it, but I suspect that, as soccer and rugby started to emerge, there was competition for players and that sort of thing. And the Gaelic games, of course, that other stick sport. So all those sports came into competition with lacrosse, and it just died out. So, so around 1903, 1904, men's lacrosse died out in Ireland. And then around 1920, a girls' school in Belfast called Richmond Lodge started playing women's lacrosse. And that was mostly a carryover from like teachers who had trained in the UK, moving to Belfast and introducing the sport there. And then it spread from there to girls' schools around the Dublin area. So there were several girls' schools that started playing around Dublin. And they played from 1920 all the way up till about 1970. And there was Irish teams formed. There were regular games. This is women's lacrosse now, regular games between Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. I've actually met some of these women, who are in their late 80s now, who had amazing memories of playing, traveling to England and playing lacrosse,
Wow.
Back in like the 1950s and 60s. And, one of them even gave me her old stick. So nowadays the game is played with kind of aluminium shaft and a plastic head, and it's very modern, and the style changes very quickly. But back in the day, they played with these wooden sticks. So I even got a really old women's wooden stick from like 1940 from one of these players, and I have it locked away somewhere. So, but then women's lacrosse died out around the 1970s. One of the reasons was like it was mostly these kind of Protestant girls' schools around the Dublin area, and that population actually began to decline. And several of these schools, there were like 5 schools that played a regular competition against one another, and they eventually merged into one school, which today still exists. It's called the Rathdown School, and so the competition kind of disappeared because there was no longer 5 schools playing against each other. It's just one school.
Sure.
So that died out.
Shaun's Belfast. So I'm intrigued to hear, because it seems like a lot of the roots are in that area for the sport. So I would be interested to see, like, growing up, Shaun, was it there, or?
No, by that time, it died out. I mean, there was the history of it was around, but as Mike said, I mean, soccer, rugby, Gaelic football, hurling dominated everything.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when did it come?
I mean, it made a bit of a resurgence, like in the zeitgeist, probably in the early 2000s, whenever ice hockey came to the island with the Belfast Giants, and there was this huge push of this is the first cross community sport where no side could claim it, but then there was actually no let's go back further. The first cross-community sport was 100 years ago when it was lacrosse. So some interest started to drive back up in around that, thanks to the emergence of the European Hockey League.
Oh, wow. So would that be when lacrosse kind of reintroduced itself back in around that timeline, Mike?
Yeah, around 2001. So a men's team was formed that played in the European Championships in 2001 in Wales. And then in 2005, we established a women's team again. And really, it started to really re-emerge from that point. And today, like a lot of our teams are based in universities, but our women's team at Queen's in Belfast has been extremely strong, well organized, like really good leadership. And actually, they're looking at, because some of those players have graduated, they're looking at splitting and creating like a Belfast City team as well as a Queen's team. So,
oh, wow. That's great. So
yeah. Now, another, if I could add, back, I mentioned in 1872 the Newton Ards team was formed. Like around the late 1800s, as Shaun rightfully points out, like I think I had a record of 15 teams being in existence, and like 13 of those were in Northern Ireland. One was in Dublin and one was in Limerick. So that was definitely like the kind of hotspot of lacrosse in Ireland. And some of these teams, like from Canada, from Montreal, and that traveled and played these exhibition games, they invited the Irish men's team to travel back over. And in 1886, the Irish men's national lacrosse team traveled from Ireland to the USA and Canada. And they spent like 3 months traveling around the US and Canada, playing exhibition games, being hosted at banquets and all this kind of thing. And remarkably, there is a scrapbook of that trip that's held in the National Library of Ireland. And it's like absolutely incredible what's in there. It's like menus of, dinners that were hosted for them. Just all kinds of incredible paraphernalia. And there's like detailed records of the games that they played and things like that. So.
Sure. So where are we sitting at modern day now with regards to the sport and being in Ireland and, the percentage, I guess, because there's a lot of sport, obviously, that you're competing with in the country, but obviously you guys are doing well based upon, recent outcomes.
Yeah. So, yeah, we're still very much a minority sport. As I mentioned, we have teams based at several universities, UCD, Queen's, Galway, Cork, Limerick. And what we're trying to do more now is get into schools. The biggest challenge we have is most of the people involved, like me, I played for Ireland from 2004 to 2019. But now, I have a young family, I work full time. So it's difficult because schools say, yeah, like, please, we want to introduce lacrosse. Can you come in like the next 4 Tuesdays at 2 p.m., but like we don't have anybody who has the capacity to do that, right?
Sure.
Because they're either working full time or they're full-time students or whatever. So that's really what we're trying to concentrate on now. Like, how do we build coaching capacity to have people who can deliver that kind of stuff? But then, so that's our domestic development. And then our national teams punch above their weight because we draw upon the Irish diaspora, so people who are eligible for Irish passports, are either born on the island of Ireland or have a parent or grandparent born. They are eligible for a passport. And so we, cultivate really good relationships with our diaspora population. And our national teams have large numbers of these players to represent us. So we kind of punch above our weight in major competitions as a result of that. And it is the number one source of tension and debate in international lacrosse, because a good analogy is basketball, because it's a similar thing where it's so big in North America, but other countries, it's still so small. So countries rely on these diaspora players.
Sure. Yeah.
But there's a huge debate around it. So even I mentioned at the start the European Championships is happening like right now in Poland. And England has won the European Championships every year except for one. Germany won it back in 2001. But this year, England got beat in the semi-final by Italy. Or no, sorry, they got beat by Israel, which is a country like us that draws heavily on its diaspora population. So, and the team that beat us in the semi-final is Italy, who are the same. They have a strong cohort of Italian Americans. So now the final is Italy against Israel, but everybody's complaining, oh, it's just a whole bunch of Americans, And like we try to be like really engaged and constructive in that debate. And I'm sure you and your listeners will appreciate that too, that it's like, it isn't a bunch of Americans, like they're Irish citizens. They have every right to play for Ireland, just like any other Irish citizen. So we really try to break down that kind of barrier, this us and them.
Sure. I mean, a lot of diaspora that would be Irish Americans, but have their passports would identify just as much as being Irish as they would American. So I totally understand that. I could understand that from an Israeli standpoint too. I can wrap my head around that. So
yeah,
one thing that I've been lucky enough, I heard your presentation at the summer school event. I also heard the presentation on Ireland Lacrosse at Quinnipiac University. And one thing that I think is a very intriguing story is how lacrosse isn't necessarily just a sport for Ireland. It's been a piece of diplomacy, and the relationship that Ireland Lacrosse has cultivated with the Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee and their hurdles that they're running into going into the Olympics and World Cup and everything else. And I think that's a story that our listeners would be really intrigued about if you wanted to get into that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mentioned about the Olympics, right? And LA, and like everybody knows that it has been part of, World Lacrosse, which is the International Federation, their strategic plan to grow the game for the last 3 decades is get it into the Olympics, right? And that took strategic objective took a major step forward when they actually got a very prominent philanthropic donor on board. And it's no secret who it is. It's a guy named Joe Tsai, Tsai, who owns the Brooklyn Nets. He owns a few. He might own the New York Liberty women's basketball team. He owns a couple of professional lacrosse teams, and he's involved in Alibaba.com. So he's like a billionaire basically. But he played lacrosse at Yale University himself, so he's given back to the sport. Yeah. But basically, when he came on board to kind of bankroll this initiative by World Lacrosse, it really just like accelerated. So, but everybody knew that in the back of everybody's mind, what's that going to mean for the Haudenosaunee? Because like they finish in 3rd place in World Championships. So, they're a very strong team, but not quite as strong as like say USA and Canada, who are typically the top 2 teams in the world. So, there's an event that's kind of similar to the Olympics. It's called the World Games. It's like a separate organization, but it's a kind of staging area event for sports that are trying to get into the Olympics. So there was this World Games event in, I think it was 2022 in Birmingham, Alabama. And there would only be like 8 teams invited to that event. And the participation was based on how teams finished in the men's World Championship in 2018, which happened to be in Israel. So, essentially, the Haudenosaunee didn't get invited to the World Games event, and it was a big surprise to them. And nobody in international lacrosse circles was fully aware why, or that they weren't going to get invited. But it was obviously connected to the fact that They're not formally recognized as a member of the International Olympic Committee. They don't have a national Olympic body. They haven't competed in events. So it was like the first instance where this issue of Haudenosaunee inclusion, potentially in the Olympics, reared its head, but in this case, in the World Games. So what ended up happening is we actually got invited to the tournament because if you look, like you can find it on Wikipedia, the list of teams that finished in the 2018 Men's World Championship, like say England and Scotland finished ahead of us. But because this was an Olympic style event, they were just one team as Team GB as they compete in the Olympics. So then it moved down a spot. There were two teams, I think it was like Philippines and another team that escapes me. They played in Israel, but they didn't conform to some of the eligibility criteria. So World Lacrosse said, okay, we'll let you play this time, but your final placement cannot count towards any future event. So like they were knocked out, right? And then the Haudenosaunee were skipped over. So the way it turned out, I think we actually finished in 12th in Israel in 2018, but we got bumped up as the 8th team because of all those anachronistic things about Haudenosaunee were third, they didn't get invited. Scotland and England were both ahead of us, but they were combined as TGB. Philippines were not invited because of their eligibility issues, etc. So we were the last team to get invited. It only dawned on me, as CEO, quite late. Like, actually, I think we're on track to be invited to this event. And then everything about the Haudenosaunee not being invited emerged. And basically what happened is a Haudenosaunee player set up a change.org online petition. And the international lacrosse world kind of exploded around the issue. So we were kind of just monitoring what was happening, to see, basically, like people like me, you play the game, you love the game. Like the Haudenosaunee represent like the soul of the game.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
So their exclusion is a big deal. Like Irish, listen, it would be like having hurling in the Olympics, but the Irish team is not allowed to go and play, right?
Sure, yeah.
So they invented the sport, right? So it's like a big issue for people, who like are passionate about the game. So anyway, as the situation unfolded, World Lacrosse met with the World Games organizers, met with USA Lacrosse, and met with various officials, and eventually they said, okay, we're willing to allow the Haudenosaunee to compete as their own team. So that was a really positive development. But then the issue was, well, like you can't have 9 teams, right? Because you need to have an even number. So really the only way is if somebody backs out. And to me, I was keeping very close track on what was happening. When the Haudenosaunee petition came out, I actually surveyed. At that time, we had what was called an operations group, which is about like 35 people who were involved in organizing Ireland Lacrosse, who run the sport in country, or coaches of our national teams, whatever. And I surveyed all them just to say, are you aware of what's happening? Do you have any view on it? And like unanimously, the view was like, whatever we can do to facilitate the Haudenosaunee, we should do that. People had different opinions, because in international lacrosse community, people were saying, we should boycott the event. Canada should boycott the event. USA should boycott the event. This is an injustice, Other people saying, like lots of different strategies on how to address this. So I just wanted to get a sense, where did the community I represent, what was the feeling? And it was just like, whatever we can do. So when it emerged that there was a willingness to accommodate the Haudenosaunee, I could read the writing on the wall. Like, if you couldn't have more than 8 teams, and if you're including the Haudenosaunee, like the obvious thing is the lowest ranked team should be the one that, should bow out.
Yeah.
And I totally accept that. Like I played sport my whole life. I know what its rankings is. You accept losing with dignity, right? Um, so I knew that was coming. So then I get kind of out of the blue, I get an invite for a Zoom call from World Lacrosse. And I knew what it was about. I get on the call, and they say we want to talk about the Haudenosaunee and the World Games. And I said, look, I think I know where this is going already. Like, we're the lowest ranked team. We're very pleased that you found a way to include the Haudenosaunee. We recognize you're not going to be able to include, 9 teams or what have you. So the terminology I used was voluntarily vacate our position in the tournament. And it's a kind of, I think it's like a legal term, which means pretend we never got invited in the first place. If you vacate a case, you just pretend it never happened.
Right.
So that's essentially what we did. Yeah. But one of the analogies I like to use about it occasionally is when I was a small kid, I mentioned, I'm a big soccer person. And my favorite film as a kid was Escape to Victory, the story about Pele and
brilliant film. Yep.
Oh, I love it. But, I thought about the Irish goalkeeper who had to have his arm broken so that Sylvester Stallone
could come in. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I thought about it. We were like that poor Irish goalkeeper who had to get his arm broken for the greater good.
Yeah. I mean, like that entire story, it touches on, going back to our episode last week, Mike, as well. Every week we have someone coming on the show we're talking about, and no matter whether it's music, whether it's sport, culture, there's an underlying theme here about Irish values, and it's that aspect of supporting heritage, respecting others' identities, and fairness. And I mean, Evan to Betsy, in this regards, it went beyond sport, and it still transcends. I mean, even going further, I'm a history teacher by trade. The aspect of Native American culture gifting, support to the Irish during the famine, during the Great Hunger, and here's a small aspect of gifting back and the respect for Native culture, Native heritage, and something that's truly tied to the identity of the Haudenosaunee here in the United States and North America as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and those relationships, there's actually been so many touch points in that relationship. So even from my personal experience, just to give you another example, one of my most memorable experiences playing for Ireland is, so I mentioned box lacrosse. So for the sake of all your listeners, there's actually 3 disciplines of lacrosse. There's field lacrosse, which is like 10v10 on a grass pitch about the size of a soccer pitch. Then there's sixes lacrosse, which is the very specific version that's for the Olympics, which is a bit like rugby sevens for the Olympics. So smaller pitch, shorter games, faster. And then there's box lacrosse, which is a version that's played indoors 6v6 on a converted ice hockey rink. So they lay turf on an ice hockey rink, and they play smaller goals 6v6. So when I first got involved with Ireland, we only had field lacrosse, and there was a Canadian guy who, funnily enough, has a connection to the Belfast Giants ice hockey team. He's actually now married to the daughter of the former team doctor for the Belfast Giants. And he was Canadian, and Canadians are big on box lacrosse. So he actually drove the establishment of the Irish box team. And the first time we played in a box world championship was in 2007 in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So we all went there. It was super exciting. And the local community, local kind of indigenous community around Halifax are called the Micmac. And the Micmac hosted a dinner. So what the Haudenosaunee often do is at these tournaments, they connect with whoever the local indigenous tribe is, and they have kind of get together. They kind of interact with each other culturally. And we got invited because it was our first time playing in this World Championship. So the Micmac hosted this banquet for the Haudenosaunee. They were still called the Iroquois back then, and the Irish team. And we went along, and it was just incredible. Like, we exchanged sticks. We actually gave them hurleys from Ireland, and we had this absolute feast of, like, I remember it was lobster and moose meat, which, like, it's not that good. Well, it's not very common here, that's for sure. But obviously, it's easy to get in Halifax, both those things. And we just had this absolute feast, and it was such a memorable occasion for me, like, to be part of that celebration. And there's so many touch points like that. Where
that's an amazing tradition, though, to like go somewhere else and you defer to wanting to sit down and celebrate each other's culture and learn about their, the other indigenous populations' culture there. And it's a great tradition that you guys must have been, felt really special that you were able to be part of.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Good stuff. So how did you get wrapped up in Ireland Lacrosse, as in the organization?
Yeah, that's a great. I think it's a great story. My lacrosse origin story. So, so as I mentioned to you, I was born in Westchester County in New York. My mother is from Wexford. My father is from Brooklyn, New York, but both his parents were from Donegal. So I grew up in New York, and I started playing lacrosse locally for a team in kind of, I guess it would have been 7th and 8th grade, which is like 12 or 13 years old. And I absolutely fell in love with the sport. I was really into it. I actually got really good at sticks. Like, so every team will have somebody who knows how to string sticks. So I got really into stick stringing. So I'd have, older players coming to me and asking me to string their sticks for them. I was so into it, right? So I absolutely love the sport. And then when it came time to go to high school, the local high school had a decent team, but my parents, being good Irish Catholic parents, sent me to a private Catholic high school, which was like half an hour away, which did not have a lacrosse team. And I was totally and utterly devastated by it. That I lost the chance. I actually wrote letters to the local school board saying, even though I go to this school, could I play for the other high school that's only like a mile from my house? And they said no. And so I was really, really devastated. Now, I played soccer in high school. It was called John F. Kennedy Catholic High School, by the way, in New York, just to add even more to it, right? So I lost the chance. I tried to play, recreationally, but it just wasn't the same. And then I went to university. I went to Villanova University, which is a big Irish university just outside Philadelphia. Sonia O'Sullivan went there. Eamon Coughlin went there. Ronnie Delaney went there, all Olympians in athletics. And I tried out for the club team there. And even though I hadn't played competitively really for a number of years, they were like, okay, yeah, you're good enough to play for our club team. It's going to cost you $3,000 a semester, and you have to find your own way to the games. And I was like, no, I can't do that.
Seriously.
But those two things, having lost the opportunity to play and the cost, those two things continue to drive me to make lacrosse available to people in Ireland. If you want to play, we'll find a chance for you to play. We're not going to make it prohibitively expensive. And so basically, after I graduated from Villanova, I moved to Limerick. I ended up doing postgraduate study at the University of Limerick. I moved to London for a short period, and then back to UCD, where I currently work in UCD, which is the biggest university in Ireland. And while I was at UCD, a guy from New York had put a poster up in the gym saying, come and play. Do you want to try the fastest game on 2 feet, faster than hurling? That was his way of advertising. Very contentious.
I just looked at
and he was never heard from again. Is that what you're telling us? Because
yeah. He was a Long Island guy, so for people who know people from Long Island, he had an edge to him, you know. But anyway, I was like, I sent him like 2 emails. I phoned him, I texted him. I said, I know how to play. I'd love to play. So I ended up on the Irish team in the 2004 European Championships. And as I said, I played all the way to 2019. So I had a 15-year career playing lacrosse for Ireland. I have 65 caps. I played in 11 major tournaments, European and World Championship tournaments. I've traveled the world. I played club team events. And I often ask myself, if you had asked 15-year-old me, do you want to play in high school in New York and maybe in college if you're good enough, or not have that chance and end up playing for Ireland, travel the world doing this? Even 15-year-old me probably would have said, yeah, that actually sounds pretty cool. I think I'll take that.
That's a good swap.
So, yeah. But I continued playing till, I was in my mid 40s by the time I finished. And it was just kind of making up for the lost opportunity that I had to play when I was younger.
Wow, that's fantastic. Obviously you, oh no, go ahead, Shaun.
I was going to say the obviously it's a grown sport, but it's still an infant sport, despite it having been on the island for so long. What do you see as what are the biggest hurdles? Because even here, like South Shore, Massachusetts, in certain communities, the biggest hurdles are, access to equipment for a lot of kids, and where the equipment's not always readily available in Ireland. What are the other hurdles that exist in getting youth attracted to the sport?
Yeah, so the equipment is a good one because, I mentioned this tension in international lacrosse communities around the North American dominance, right? But one fantastic way that you can use that relationship to contribute to development in the country is equipment drives, and donated equipment. So because we have so much personnel traveling, either North Americans coming to Ireland for training camps or what have you, or us going over there for tournaments, like even me as CEO, I'm always bringing couple of extra big equipment bags full of donated sticks or donated helmets or what have you. So equipment wise, we're actually pretty good in terms of being able to utilize that partnership that we have with so many people in our diaspora in North America to help bring equipment. Goals can be tricky because they're big and heavy. I mean, they're not big. They're 6 foot by 6 foot, but they're quite heavy and they're hard to get hold of. We actually hosted a world championship, a men's U20 world championship at the University of Limerick in 2022. And what that event enabled us to do is to, within the context of the tournament budget, to bring in like loads of goals and goal nets for that event, which then stay in country that we can then utilize for ongoing development. So like we've kind of ticked the box of equipment, field equipment, personal equipment, stick donations. Financially, every organization could do with more money to try to achieve what it wants to do. But because we have now like 8 national teams, we have this ERA team, we call it the ERA team, which is for players maybe who don't qualify for a passport, but still have Irish heritage to be part of our program. They can play in club tournaments all over the place. So we develop these ongoing, say, annual events, which help generate cash flow for the organization, which we can utilize for development purposes. But the key thing, as I kind of touched on, is coaches in the country who have the time to go out into a school and to take on the responsibility to set up a team. And I think that's become particularly tricky now because like the young people these days, their time, people are struggling to get on the, because of cost of living, to get on the house, on the property ladder. There's a lot of employment instability. People are emigrating, which has always been a thing for Ireland. So having people able to commit the time and energy on a voluntary basis, it's a huge hurdle for us. It's difficult for us to overcome that. But that's what we're working on now. We're trying to figure out, can we pay coaches? Is there a way that we can generate sufficient income that we can pay people? So it's like a part-time job. Like that seems a really a potential solution for us to that issue.
Now, do you also deal with kind of, let's say, like not really competition, but with regards to attracting younger kids into the sport? I know, like when I was in high school, and that's about when lacrosse was starting to get big here in the States again. There was a natural transition. Like a lot of the lacrosse players, based on the season, would be the guys who played American football, and then they would just transition into lacrosse season and back and forth. Is there a natural transition for someone over there that would be playing another sport to transition into lacrosse? Is there a seasonal overlap or anything like that?
That's a great question, and it's something personally I've had some good experience with lately. So, my wife is a teacher in an all boys school in Dublin called Terenure College, and it's a huge rugby school, boys rugby school. And like I often tell people in the US, like um, secondary school rugby in Dublin is not far off like high school American football in Texas. It's got that huge like culture and intensity to it, right?
Sure.
And so one thing I did, so I used to go into this all boys school in the PE class, and I'd take time off work and I'd go in to their PE class and introduce lacrosse, say 4 Thursdays in a row. And then that was it, so it was just like a taster session and there was no continuity with it. So 2 years ago, what I tried to do is say, okay, I'm going to do that and then I'm going to transition into something more consistent. So what I did is I delivered some intro sessions in November, and then I transferred to lunchtime lacrosse sessions on a Friday. So like we would just play pickup lacrosse on Fridays. And that worked reasonably well. I would get 20 odd guys who would come out consistently. And that was mainly towards what we call transition year students, which are like, I think it's 4th year students in secondary school, 2 years before they do their leaving certificate. So it was good, but what I learned is that's a big ask to ask, a 15-year-old kid to give up his lunchtime every Friday for the whole year, right?
Mm-hmm. So
now we're taking a step back and we're trying to think, what's a better way of doing this? So that school's rugby season, the school's final, is always held on St. Patrick's Day, right? And so what I found, or what we're currently thinking about doing is basically running a much shorter, more intense thing from mid-March to mid-May, which is like 8 weeks, and introduce lacrosse to these schools. If we're looking for coaches, like young coaches who are students, instead of saying we need you to give up, your Friday from September all the way to May, that's a big ask. But if we say, can you give us 8 weeks, it's much more compressed, and it means it's tailored to our capacity to actually deliver, our coaching resources that we have available. And, the first time I tried this with Terenure, you have these guys who've been playing competitive rugby and they're, jacked up, like they're fully fit, like super intense, and Paddy's Day comes and goes, and that's the end of the season. These guys are looking for something to do for the rest of the year, and this is perfect. So a bit like what you said, the American football players get drawn to lacrosse in the US because it has that physicality to it. So what we're trying to do is the same, like pick up these rugby guys after the end of their season, give them a lacrosse taster, do it in a very compressed period. And then at the end, like we're trying to do like a schools cup competition. So quick taster, and then let them play against each other for like a schools cup event. So we're just trying to reformulate that plan, make sure we have enough schools on board. All we need is a minimum of kind of 3 or 4 who want to give that a go. And then we have a proper, 1-day schools cup tournament at the end of it. So that's really what we're looking to do in this coming year.
That's great.
And then obviously we're 3 years out from the Olympics in LA. And that's going to be, I'm just going back, anytime there's sport on TV at home, everyone's playing that sport. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good chance, especially for the Olympics, having that to tap into it and get young people over the summer interested.
Yeah, I mean, we had a big step this past. I think it was only just in June that we were fully admitted as full members of the Olympic Federation of Ireland, and so that was like monumental, and that's what they do, like for sports that are coming on board for the next Olympic cycle. And actually, I have here just in the post, I don't know if you can see this, but I got uh, these pins from the Olympic Federation of
Oh,
Ireland.
that's cool.
You see, it has a shamrock and the Olympic rings on it. They sent me a batch of those. So, we were talking about the World Games event, which was in Birmingham, Alabama in 2022. We withdrew so the Haudenosaunee could participate. That's all our men's team. Our women's team has qualified outright for the World Games that's happening this year in Chengdu in China. So we're super excited about that. So like it's karma, it's kind of karma. Like now we have our chance. It's our women's team, So now we will have our chance to play in the World Games. I haven't given up our spot previously. So our women, they actually played their opening game against the USA. I think it's on the 7th of August in Chengdu in China.
Oh, wow. That's good to know. I'm sure people would be interested in watching that. So what, to be honest, just from my education as well, what is the process of you guys qualifying for the Olympics? What do you have to achieve between now and then to be able to hit that mark?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're all trying to figure that out. And the answer to that starts with the discussion between World Lacrosse and the IOC. So, and the first part of that discussion is how many teams. And the answer now we have to that is 6. There'll be 6 men's teams and 6 women's teams, right? So that at least we know what the field is going to be. The next question that's being asked, and we don't have an answer for this yet, is will there be a requirement around regional representation?
I was just going to ask that,
Yeah. So I think it's different in different sports. I think the IOC works with the federation to decide what that actually looks like. But like, again, I mentioned soccer a lot. Like I kept a close eye on the soccer tournament in the Paris Olympics, and I noticed it was a very unusual group of teams that were going to the Paris soccer tournament. And there was that very high level of like regional representation. So I think like New Zealand was there, maybe Australia. There were some African teams. So there's definitely a deliberate attempt to make sure there's regional representation. Now, within Europe, we stand to do pretty well in that context because in terms of continental federations, there's the North American one is called PALA, Pan American Lacrosse Association. Then there's the European Lacrosse Federation, and then APLU, Asia Pacific Lacrosse Union, and then there's an African one. Europe stands to benefit because we have the largest number of members because there's so many individual members in Europe. So that should mean that we have a higher level. Basically, what I'm expecting is we may have 2 European teams, men, and 2 women. And that would likely also mean then that the North American would only have 2. And then you would have 1 from Asia Pacific, 1 from Africa. That's what I think it would look like. And then if it's the case that the North American would only have 2, USA already qualifies because they're the hosts of the Olympics. So the second team is very likely to be Canada. So because Canada would be stronger than the Haudenosaunee. So in a roundabout way, what I'm getting to is the Haudenosaunee issue may actually get resolved by them not even qualifying, right? That they may not if North America is only provided with 2 spots in the tournament, Haudenosaunee are typically third. They probably won't qualify for the event, which would mitigate the whole issue of Haudenosaunee competing in the Olympics, if you know what I mean.
You wonder if they're
that's
planning
just,
that on purpose, though.
I'm just speculating.
Yeah.
But I think that could be the case. So, but we're waiting to see. Now, if it's the case that Europe gets 2 spots, like right now, there's women. Our women's team is probably our senior women's team is stronger than our senior men's team. So our women, like right at this moment, our women's team is second in Europe. So they would have a realistic chance of making it to LA in that context. But like we're just kind of waiting to see and waiting for more information from World Lacrosse and the IOC.
Great. That's exciting. Now, one question I would have for some of our listeners here, because they have had, they might not have known about it unless they were really plugged into the lacrosse community, but people have had the opportunity to see you guys play in New England, and you were just in Massachusetts not that long ago, and then you're going to be up in upstate New York, up in Utica, with the area program that you were talking about. So that's that. If anyone's interested, exactly where and what's the context of the games that are going on.
Yeah, so those are 2 events that we are sending our area teams to. So the one in Massachusetts recently, in Weston, Massachusetts, it was called the Heritage Cup. And that takes place alongside the NCAA Final Four weekend. So I think the NCAA Final Four next year is going to be in Virginia, but we'll likewise have teams there. So last year at Heritage Cup, or this past year, we had like under 13, under 15, under 19, and senior men's and women's teams. So it's super exciting to engage with, the bigger Irish lacrosse playing community in those ways. And then the event in Utica is a box tournament. And that one is taking on particularly significance this year because the European Box Championship is in Prague next year. So, like, heritage players are welcome, but also Irish passport players. This is an opportunity to be evaluated and get in the mix for potential selection for the national team for next year. So, people go to our website, irelandlacrosse.ie. We have a button for membership. We have a very advanced membership system. If you become a member, you can then sign up for these events that we regularly communicate and advertise to all our members. So that's the best way to get connected. And, I'm sure you and your listeners have experienced, if people do have a parent or grandparent born in Ireland and they play lacrosse, start working on your passport, your foreign birth registration, and all that, because it can be really time consuming and onerous. So the sooner you do it, the better.
Sure. I have my wife's cousin played lacrosse in DeSales, and he just graduated, so he probably still has the wherewithal to play. What would be, for someone like him or anyone who's listening, what would be their way into the air program and actually be able to play on the team?
Yeah, as I say, go to our website, click on membership, become a member, and then we communicate the opportunities to play through the membership system with a link to sign up. You pay your money. The coaches evaluate like everybody who signed up. If we need players, we'll take everybody, and that's the way to get connected in with the program.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to let him know.
Yeah,
that's good stuff.
Awesome.
Okay. I think we filled the hour.
I know. I was gonna say, I mean, like, Mike, do you have any other plugs? But before we wrap things up, obviously, you talked about the AIR program. Are there any other ways that if someone here in Massachusetts, in the northeast of the states, wants to help and they have a passion for lacrosse, get lacrosse off the ground in Ireland, how can they contribute and how can they help out?
Yeah, that'd be great. And we have this slogan that we use, "Ijonta Akela," which is like together as one. So like it's like a family. Like we try to cultivate, like everybody who wants to be part of is welcome to be part. So um, again, go on our website, become a member. Even your membership fee, I think it's maybe €50 a year. That helps us to do things like pay for coaching or get equipment. And then that gets you into the communication loop about events that are coming up and everything that we're trying to do. And people can also follow us on social media. We're very strong on Instagram. Our address is at Ireland Lacrosse. Um, there's loads going on now. Like I mentioned, the European Championship. Unfortunately, we lost against England, so we finished in fourth place. But actually, European championships are now qualifiers for world championships, and we had to finish in the top 7 to qualify for the next world championship. So even though we missed out on a medal, we've made that qualification. So, and that's important because the next world championship is in Japan in 2027, which will just be an amazing experience. So,
Sure.
and oftentimes at these world championships, they have what are called festival tournaments alongside. So if they have a festival there, which we think they will, then we would bring our era teams to play in the festival. So like I'm certainly, I turned 50 this year, and the idea of playing, like we call it masters, when you play at the upper level over 30s or over 50, masters level over 50s lacrosse in Japan in 2027. I mean, that's like top of my bucket list. So anybody, who wants to get involved and still play at any age level, become a member and you'll hear about these kinds of opportunities.
I think that's great because you're at the point now in the States where the sport, there's a lot of individuals that are out of college at this point that are still passionate about the sport. I mean, just like any sport. I mean, we talk about sport is just as part of culture and pride and history as anything else. And I think a lot of people that are out of college age would be interested in those types of opportunities where they can keep playing and then have those types of experiences along with it other than just doing pickup games or anything like that. So,
yeah, exactly. And, there's ways that they can help us too, coaching some of our teams or what have you. We want to cultivate that kind of community of people.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Mike. I'm very glad we were able to set this up. It definitely, like I said in the beginning, it gives a spotlight to something that people might not put 2 and 2 together with regards to Irish and lacrosse and everything else. So that's great. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, thanks for having me. And I think it's really, we have this strong diaspora connection with our teams, and it's a very living thing, people coming back and forth. And it was, I think, really great that we actually connected during the famine thing, which was a diaspora, event that didn't have so many positive things come out of it, but now we're talking about amazing connections and really positive stories that emerge from that connection between Ireland and its diaspora. So
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm a passport holder. As long as you have a sideline doctor, I might grab my sons out of the garage and make the drive up to Utica.
Oh, very good. Yeah. Brilliant. That'd be great, Michael.
Oh God. Anything else for you, Shaun?
No, just, as always, thank you, Mike, for coming on. And for the listeners, please make sure you check out Ireland Lacrosse online, follow the ERA program. And if you have Irish heritage, find that lacrosse stick. If you have it buried away somewhere, I'm pretty sure, Mike, your kids is buried in the garage somewhere. So you've got time enough to get out there and start whipping the ball around.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed the show, make sure I don't drop dead over here. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share it with a friend. And if you've got a story to tell or another topic you'd love to hear about, like Ireland Lacrosse, reach out to us by emailing us at craiconthecoast@gmail.com. That's CRAIC on the coast gmail.com. And until next time, slán go foil, goodbye for now, and may the Craic be mighty wherever you are. Thank you so much, boys.
Got to